Hello everyone, this is Savannah Bekowski, Project Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled, What Challenges Do Different Sizes and Types of Systems Face? To give you an idea of where others on the webinar are tuning in from, we have prepared this map. You can see that we have attendees spread throughout the entire country. Thanks to you all for joining us today. This session is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have centers spread across the entire country. And here you can see the areas of expertise that the EFCN focuses on. Workshops, trainings, and direct technical assistance are provided on a variety of the topics listed below. The EFCN also provides a small systems blog. You can learn more about water finance and management through this blog. Blog posts feature lessons learned from our trainings and technical assistance, descriptions of available tools, and small systems success stories. You will have an opportunity to subscribe to this blog at the end of the webinar. And in addition to workshops, direct technical assistance, and webinars, as part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project, we are also creating a table that lists the major funding sources for drinking water infrastructure projects in each state and territory. And here's how you can access those tables. From the EFCN homepage, please go to the Resources tab and then click on Funding Sources by State. This will take you to a map of the country. If you click on the state you're interested in, you will find a PDF table of the relevant funding sources for drinking water infrastructure in that state. The table will look like the image on the left-hand side of the slide. For each funding program, it will include the name of the program, a short description, and contact information for someone who works in the program. Now, before I turn the presentation over to our speaker, I do have some quick polling questions for you. The first polling question is, what kind of water utility do you represent? Please select from one of the following answers: a for-profit water utility, a local government utility, either municipal or county level, a non-for-profit, cooperative, or association utility, another water utility such as a school or hotel, or you're not from a drinking water utility. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. As you can see from our attendees that are part of a water system, the majority of attendees represent a local government, either municipal or county level. And the next polling question I have is, what size water system does your utility operate by number of people served? And please select from one of the following answers. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And of the attendees from a water system, it looks like the majority of us come from large or very large systems, but it's a pretty split even tie between very small, small, and medium. Now at this point, I will turn the presentation over to our presenter. For today's session, we have Nick Willis, Program Manager at the Wichita State University Environmental Finance Center. Nick, welcome, and take it away.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining here today. And everything looking good, Savannah?
Perfect.
Okay. We are going to be talking about a fair amount of topics detailing challenges of varying sizes of water utilities and types of water utilities that are out there. So everything here I'm talking about is generally a generalization and also not terribly in-depth. So please keep that in mind. If there are questions, feel free to ask those later on, or get with me after the webinar's over, and I'll try and, if I can't answer it, get you in contact with somebody who knows more than I do. So again, thanks for coming to the webinar today. A little bit about what we're going to go over is first to give some context to everybody here about some of the aspects of water utilities in the United States. Then we will talk about kind of the basis of why water utilities exist. They're to provide safe water for the utilities customers, and the main challenge with that is how do you stay in compliance with Safe Drinking Water Act regulations, and a little bit of an overview on the Safe Drinking Water Act as well. Then we'll look at some of the challenges that are out there for utilities in both urban and rural settings. The demographic challenge is actually more than a single challenge, and we'll talk about some of the main drivers of demographic changes that can impact your water utilities customer base and also your operations. And the final challenge we'll discuss is some of the management challenges specifically related to smaller systems. With that, we'll talk a little bit now about water utilities in the United States. This may be a surprising number to you, but there's approximately 52,000 regulated water utilities in the United States. So these are utilities that fall under basically Safe Drinking Water Act regulation or state level regulations that are slightly more stringent than federal regulations would entail. Of these, 42,000 or so utilities serve 3,300 customers or less. So that would be 3,300 individual persons obtain water from the utility. So the vast majority of utilities out there are relatively small, which has a lot of impacts down the line that we'll be talking about. Now, of those 42,000 utilities that are 3,300 or less, which is one of EPA's cutoffs for if you're a small system or not, those utilities serve about 24.5 million people. So what you see is that the vast majority of people served by water utilities are served by a relatively small portion of water utilities that are larger. And then the vast majority of utilities serve a relatively small population base. A quick average of that shows that 530 people per small system would be the average. That's pretty rough calculation, though. A lot of those small systems are not community water suppliers, and we'll talk a little bit about that moving on. The ownership of water utilities is primarily governmental. You see here in the graph, the dark blue or purple is about 70% are operated in a city or some sort of other municipal status. So these would be, legally recognized by the state level as a municipal incorporation. Generally, these are going to be cities, towns, villages, whatever you may be called in your home state. And there's some other kind of odd structures out there. For example, a fire district in Vermont, to my knowledge, is actually considered a municipality. So it's not cut and dry, but most water utilities are operated by some sort of a municipal corporation. Counties operate about 5% of water utilities within the United States, and these can be either on a county-wide basis, so maybe there's a single utility serving most of the incorporated areas in a county, or it can be a combination of basically the county operates one or several smaller systems. Oftentimes these might be a subdivision that's a few miles away from any other developed area, and the county will operate that water supply. Governmental districts, in most places, this will be in the form of a rural water district. They have, they're recognized under state law. They tend to have less powers, though, than county or municipalities, and these are also quite prevalent and provide water throughout the United States and to many different customers. The other dark kind of gray area, 7% of water utilities are classified as other. This could be something like a school district or a factory, maybe a campground, a state park, national park, that sort of thing. These utilities exist to support some other business function or some other public good function. So nobody builds a campground in order to run a water utility. They run a water utility in order to operate a campground. So think of it as an ancillary practice to whatever else is being done on site. And then about 2% of water utilities are investor-owned or privately owned. This is typically regulated at the state level by a corporation commission, similar to a publicly traded electric or natural gas utility. So these utilities are in business to make money for their owners. And these are not very common, as you can see, as a percent of the total out there. Another important factor when we look at utilities throughout the United States is where are they getting their water from? The EPA has basically broken it down into a groundwater source or a surface water source. And there are some different treatment regulations on these two sources of supply. What you see here is community water supplies. So these are basically water supplies that serve people where they live, you know, on a day-to-day basis. They're regulated a little bit differently than something like a rest stop would be, or a factory. Importantly, though, what you see is that smaller communities tend to have groundwater supplies and larger communities tend to have surface water supplies. One other caveat on this is that if you're classified, or if you are a system that has both groundwater wells and a surface water supply, you tend to be classified as a surface water supply. So it's not an either or. Many water utilities have both groundwater and surface water sources, and they would, in this graph, fall under the surface water supply. And we'll talk about some of the importance of this going forward. One other thing that is often talked about in the utility field is, you know, what are customer rates? Throughout the country, over the last 20, 30 years, water and wastewater bills have been increasing at a rate faster than inflation as a whole. So what this graph from the American Water Works Association shows you is the consumer price index, which is one of the more commonly used measures of monetary inflation, price inflation. Basically, a basket of goods was $10 in 1988. By 2014, would be about $21, where the $10 water bill from 1988 would now be about $33 or $34, and a $10 wastewater bill would now be somewhere in the $42, $43 range. This is so if you are working with a utility, work for a utility where the water rates and sewer rates are going up, 5%, 10% a year, and it seems like it's a never-ending process, that you're kind of in the boat with a lot of other utilities out there in the country. And there's not a lot of indication that this price pressure is going to decrease because of the need for replacement of aged infrastructure. So I think this gives a good context for some of the other items we're going to be talking about, and it's just kind of a reality check when we're looking at how do we manage our utilities in the future. Clearly, affordability is going to be more of an issue because of price increases versus everything else. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at long-term planning for your water utilities. Now we're going to move to the challenge of compliance and water quality. So when we look at this initially, it's important to keep in mind that we've done a really good job of eliminating waterborne illnesses and death within the United States and other wealthy developed countries. And a lot of the credit is due to piped water supplies. In addition, some of the other things are we just know more about how disease transmission works. Sewer systems and septic systems have been installed throughout the country. Also, habits have changed. people wash their hands more. We know that is one of the ways to spread disease. And then finally, a lot of these illnesses have been further reduced by effective treatments and or vaccinations. So when we look at the challenge of water quality, it's important to keep in mind that we've done a heck of a job so far in eliminating death from water consumption and immediate medical emergency from just doing what you have to do every day by consuming water. That being said, there still are quite a few regulatory issues and contaminants in water supplies that do pose a health risk, maybe not immediate, but maybe a long-term health risk, such as cancer or long-term toxicity. And what the EPA has found over the years is that systems that have water quality issues, water quality violations, often the root cause of the problem is not poor water quality going into their system. Rather, it's some form of lack of capacity of the system to do certain things. So the Safe Drinking Water Act was modified by Congress in the mid-1990s, and they put in requirements for capacity development. And there's basically a three-legged stool of capacity that are looked at from a regulatory perspective, and it's important for the long-term successful functioning of water utilities to really have each leg of this three-legged stool. The first of these is managerial capacity. So this is, going really to the fundamentals. The first point here is, who owns the system, who operates it. Is there an effective staffing and organizational plan in place to ensure that the system can be run on a day-to-day basis? And then is the system able to take effective external inputs? So are they able to communicate with regulators, take their advice, communicate with technical service providers, engineers, surveyors, accountants, and everything that goes into running the business of a water utility. The second of these three-legged stools, and there's really no order on them, is financial capacity. The EFC network through WSU and the other partner organizations in it does a whole lot of work on the financial capacity side. The first part of financial capacity is really revenue sufficiency. So does the system have sufficient income to pay the bills that are coming due? So this in water utilities basically are the rates bringing in enough money to pay the bills. Another important aspect of financial capacity is creditworthiness. So this is the system set up to be a good credit risk, and not that they necessarily need to take on debt today, but should the need arise in the future, would they be eligible for the various loan programs out there, or be able to issue a bond, or take on a loan, or a lease purchase agreement, whatever form of credit that they may deem necessary, are they able to qualify for it? One of the final parts of financial capacity is basically City Clerk 101. Is there fiscal management and control out there? Does the system, annually budget? Is there a capital improvement plan? Is there control of cash, which customers might pay in cash to ensure that it's not walking out the door with the employees? Do two parties sign checks and other forms of kind of control to minimize the risk of embezzlement? So financial capacity is pretty broad-based, but any one of these can trip up a system. So it's important that a system, no matter the size, tries to ensure that its finances are in good order and are protected from most of the risk out there, at least the easy risk when it comes to losing money through theft or embezzlement or something like that. The final leg of the three-legged stool is technical capacity. So first and foremost, this is, does the system have enough water? And is it of a reasonable quality and quantity so that that the system can, most of the time be able to serve its customers the necessary water in a safe capacity that will meet regulations. There are systems that do struggle with this, and fundamentally, if you don't have safe water, it's going to be hard to run your utility in compliance with regulations and for the benefit of public health protection. One of the other things of technical capacity is, does the system have proper infrastructure? So, are there redundancies in pumping systems? Are the pipelines sized large enough, of reasonable build quality? Is there enough technical knowledge to operate this infrastructure? This is where operator certification programs really come in at the state level to ensure that these sometimes quite complicated utility systems are overseen by somebody who knows how they work and knows how to operate and maintain it. So capacity development is something that EPA and the states both take very seriously, and it's important to know that there is help out there, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. Moving on to water quality. As water utilities, there's some important things to know about the Safe Drinking Water Act. So the Safe Drinking Water Act regulates water quality in all systems. The standards are the same regardless of size, and I've put an asterisk here. Surface water and groundwater are treated differently from a regulatory perspective. Most of the standards are entirely the same. So for example, you can only have 10 milligrams per liter of nitrates, regardless of if you have a surface water or groundwater treatment. Surface water does have a few more stringencies out there based on some of the risk profiles, which if you're an operator, you need to know those. If you're a board member or a manager of a utility, you need to know that there's some differences between surface and groundwater systems. Monitoring of water quality is more frequent for larger systems, and this varies based upon the contaminant in question. So while we saw that typhoid deaths had dropped significantly over time, largely due in part to drinking water and wastewater systems going in. It is important to note that 6% of children in the USA as of 2013 are being served by a system with a health-based violation. So this means that not necessarily that they're going to get typhoid or cholera from it, but certainly in many of these systems, if children would consume this over their lifetime, they'd be at increased risk of cancer or something similar. And that is a definite public health concern still. One other thing with the Safe Drinking Water Act, if you're managing or operating a system or you oversee or work with these systems, the Safe Drinking Water Act is designed to become both more comprehensive over time and more stringent over time. Basically, there's mechanisms built into it to survey potential pollutants. The number of chemicals compared to the number of regulated chemicals in drinking water, quite a large difference. And then as medical science has progressed, there have been regulated contaminants that have gotten more stringent limitations as we become more aware of the risk of those contaminants and consumptions of them through drinking water supplies. So the Safe Drinking Water Act is applicable throughout the country, and it becomes more stringent over time. And if you're operating or managing a system, those are kind of the two important things to know about it at a high level view. So with that in mind, the water quality standards do change. Also, water quality itself changes. So when we look at regulatory changes, so let's say you have a regulated contaminant and it goes from 50 to 10 is the new standard. that change may impact your water supply system. And some of the impacts to it, in order to be compliant, might require extra treatment. It might require new operations, or new processes within your treatment system. It might require whole new sources of water. From an economic perspective, it's just easier to get water from somewhere else instead of trying to treat what we have. And oftentimes, any of these may also require new infrastructure to be built. Obviously, if you're getting a new source of water supply, you're going to have pipelines and pumps to move it from wherever it is to your community's utility. Water quality can also change itself. So if you're pulling from a lake or a groundwater supply, things can happen. Human pollution of sources is not uncommon. There's been a lot of runoff pollution that may cause algae blooms in lakes. That's primarily a human-caused source of pollution, and water utilities have to deal with it. Environmental changes can also be supply limiting. So things like climate change, many utilities that are in coastal areas that pull from groundwater are quite concerned about sea level rises because it changes the hydraulic profile of their groundwater compared to the sea level. So this environmental change could limit their supply of fresh water. Environmental disruptions can also occur. These are often relatively short-lived. Something like this would be if you have the watershed above your supply reservoir, there's a forest fire go through it, your treatment plant may not be able to treat that water, and at least for some period of time, you might have to do something else. Floods can also have more short-term impacts on water quality. So let's say you're with a system that has failed to comply. First and foremost, if you have some sort of out of compliance, please try and read all documentation from your regulators and do whatever they're asking you to do. You want to maintain open communication with them and treat any compliance orders in a very serious fashion. That being said, there's kind of two ways that failure to comply with safe drinking water regulations happen. The first of these is what's considered a health-based water quality violation. So this can be an acute problem, which is fundamentally a very immediate health risk where you consume the water and you could get sick and quite ill, and for certain portions of the population could be a very dangerous situation. Think of things like pathogens, and for infants, nitrates in water are both acute or immediate health risk. There's also chronic health-based water quality violations out there, and this is actually most contaminants are considered a chronic health-based water quality violation. These can be chemical contaminants that are either natural or man-made. So they could arise from human pollution, or they could just be present in the natural environment. Either way, consuming them in excessive quantities over time through your water supply can be dangerous to health, and something needs to be done to minimize their exposure and bring their levels to within Safe Drinking Water Act levels. And then the other health-based water quality violations maybe that are chronic would be long-term carcinogenic effects or toxicity. So there's the other kind of violations of Safe Drinking Water Act are monitoring and reporting. A lot of people may frame this as a paperwork violation, and I think that there's a lot of reason to not kind of dismiss it as, oh, somebody just didn't pull something on time or failed to turn the paperwork in. That's really how regulation and public health protection through the Safe Drinking Water Act properly functions in this country. If a system repeatedly fails to monitor and or report, there's no way for the regulators to understand if the people consuming that water are consuming a healthy water. And monitoring and reporting failures are often a sign of a lack of either technical or managerial capacity within a water supply system. Also important to note is that EPA and the states that have primacy over the Safe Drinking Water Act absolutely want water supply systems to stay in compliance. From a basic level, this is protective of public health. And there's a lot of on-the-ground efforts that the EPA and states undertake to try and keep systems in compliance. This includes things like training, like this webinar and a series of webinars that are out there. On-site assistance through technical service providers is often available, and this will depend on your state situation. In-person training, so operator training in chlorine, disinfection, operator training in testing for the total coliform rule, that sort of thing is typically provided with EPA and or state funding. Off-site assistance is often available as well. And then probably the bulk of the money is coming through funding for capital improvements. These would be things like loans, loan forgiveness, and grants. As Savannah pointed out earlier, we have resources to help you locate where these funding sources may be within your states and territories. When we look at meeting water quality challenges, some gross oversimplifications here. Very small, complex systems are going to struggle to maintain water quality. And very small, simple systems can often do quite well because there's not a whole lot of moving parts. There's maybe no treatment. Very simple, ensure that your well is in good condition and you'll mostly be fine. Larger, more complex systems can often make do. The more complexity you have, though, the higher the risk of potential failures. Larger systems that are simple will often stay compliant without a whole lot of struggle. If you are overseeing a water supply system, generally speaking, a surface water system is going to be quite a bit more challenging to operate and maintain compliance than a groundwater supply system. Some of the things here, surface water is just more exposed to contaminants, and it tends to be more variable in quality. A single snowmelt or runoff event can drastically change the treatment process you have to do, where groundwater systems tend to be pretty consistent quality throughout the year. When we're looking towards the future of water quality, keep in mind that the Safe Drinking Water Act does change over time with regard to what is regulated. If you are struggling or working with a system that's struggling, one thing that's being done fairly commonly is consider regionalization, where a lot of water suppliers are looking at getting out of the treatment business, or they're improving their treatment systems and then wholesaling to other nearby utilities. Protection of sources is very important. If you can prevent contamination and minimize the need for treatment going forward, you're generally going to be better off. One other thing to consider with water quality is, the treatment that you currently have today, does that make sense going forward when the time comes to replace your treatment process? There's been a lot of movement kind of to membrane processes that can maybe minimize contaminants that may be more stringently regulated in the future. So kind of keep that in mind when you come to those large capital replacement items. What's best 10, 15, 20 years down the line? With that, I'm going to turn it over to another poll.
Yes. So for the next poll question we have is your utility population base growing, stable, shrinking, or I'm not sure. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 10 seconds. And leaving it open for about another 5 seconds. And getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And Nick, it looks like the majority of our attendees at 43% have picked stable.
Okay.
And back to you.
All right. So demographics is in kind of popular culture, kind of standard media. It's often broken down to things such as population increase or decline, and then racial, religion, ethnic breakdown of populations, where people are moving to, where people are moving from. I'm going to cover some of the things that have a relatively large impact on utility operations, and really the first and what I think is largest impact is going to be, is your population growing or declining? As you can see from this map, this is a county by county map. There's some places that between 2000 and 2010, really boomed, and then there's some places that really did quite poorly. We had a lot of counties throughout the United States that either were more or less stable or lost somewhere between 10% and 0% of their population. So this is kind of an overview on a county by county basis. That being said, that type of map is often not the most useful. The absolute growth and decline also matters. So you can see the large blue dots are where the highest population loss has occurred. You can see New Orleans, they got hit by Katrina within that time period. They kind of are the largest, I believe. But you see kind of the whole movement to the Sun Belt, people kind of moving away from the upper Midwest in larger numbers, where the kind of Great Plains, where we are, there's been some large percent declines in population, but they were fairly small counties to begin with. Moving on, another large impact item with regards to water utilities is what percentage of your population is in poverty. This map is a little hard to read in that it breaks out metro and non-metro counties. The non-metro and micropolitan counties are the green. The darker the green, the higher the poverty. The metro are the purple to blues. The darker the color there, again, the higher the percent poverty. Median household income often kind of overlays quite well with poverty rates. Fundamentally, the same type of map. It's from the same Rural Health Information Hub. You can see that certain counties that are poor have high poverty, a low median household income. That's kind of logical. And we can also see that there's counties that have lost high percentages of population that are actually pretty high median household income, relatively low poverty counties. So there's not necessarily great correlation here. And it's one of the points here is to really understand what's going on with your community. Are people moving because they feel there's better opportunities elsewhere, or is something else going on in your community with regards to population changes? Another important thing with regards to operation and management of utilities is median age. Throughout the private sector, there's been a lot of emphasis on, the baby boomers are retiring and what are we going to do about it? The public utility sector also is starting to get involved with the issue that there's kind of that gray wave of retirement. And everything being equal, if you have a young population base, it's going to be easier to fill those upcoming vacancies than if you have an older population base. So median age, there's some counties where the highest one in 2010 was 62.7 years old. That's almost the middle person there is just about ready to qualify for Medicare. So that's going to be difficult to fill open positions moving forward with an age that high. Another thing with regards to median age is that some counties actually got younger, and then some counties got quite a bit older. So this kind of shows that breakdown. And obviously, these slides will be available. There's a lot of good information on all of these sources with regards to demographics. So what do these slides mean for you? What do these maps mean? Some oversimplifications I can make. Fast population loss is going to make things most challenging, everything else being equal. And the reason for that is that households pay water bills, not individual citizens of your community. So we often see that household sizes will decline, and the actual number of occupied structures in a community will decline slower than the absolute population. So what's happening is that fewer people are living in each household. Where fast population loss will often lead to like vacant blocks and a whole lot of housing vacancies. As long as somebody is living in a house and has water and sewer service, you're getting income as a utility. So the income loss is not as big as if you have people move out of your community and there's just vacant properties then. Slow population decline can definitely be manageable, but a water utility really must recognize and plan and really do their homework when they're looking at reinvestment in their system to ensure that they're not spending a whole lot more money than they need to on larger pipes, larger pumps for growth that probably is not going to happen. Low income, high poverty areas are just going to be a challenge. That's really going to challenge the ability to reinvest in your system as there gets to be more affordability issues. And then with an aging population, there's definite positives there. If you have the demographics of your utility have a lot of kind of Social Security income, that is very stable. So you, as a utility, will often see less, causes for bill non-payment if you have people with stable income, even though it may not be high. But on the flip side, you might have to think a little bit differently about how do we fill workforce vacancies in order to continue to operate our utility. Some of the things that the private sector are doing with regards to that are more part-time work. So somebody can be semi-retired. How does that work with your utility operations? So obviously I've kind of oversimplified all of the demographic issues in the United States, and there's a lot of good information out there. But these are some of the things to maybe pull away with regards to the demographics. Understand what's going on in the community your system serves, and then try to make reasonable adaptations in order to meet the challenges of the demographics in your own water utility system. The final challenge we'll be talking about is the challenges of management. Fundamentally, it's a picture of there's too many hats going on. A lot of small communities operate water and sewer utilities. They take care of streets. They take care of public parks, maybe a swimming pool, and possibly, the water operator may be a dog catcher, and the guy who digs holes at the cemetery. When you do that many different things, it's really hard to be able to do them both efficiently and to keep up with the best practices in all of those different aspects. So managerial capacity really is a struggle in smaller water systems, and it's a lot of people that dedicated, very good employees. It's just that there's too much going on to really keep up with it really well. There's also a lack of knowledge or skills, particularly when it comes to the more specialized things. Like there's not going to be an in-house engineer. The larger utility has. There's likely not going to be in-house laboratory knowledge, so you're going to have to outsource more things. There's also a lack of volume pricing. Whenever things like chemicals are put out for bid, you're not nearly as attractive a customer to the suppliers as somebody who might buy 10 or 20 or 50 times the volume in a given year. And that can be challenging to management because sometimes it's hard to actually get the needed items because you're not necessarily that attractive of a customer to vendors that are out there in the water utility business. The final kind of problem, challenge with managerial capacity is that a system can often be operated quite well, but when it comes time to do a large capital project, there's often not staff on the ground that are familiar with capital project management, and that just makes the process a little less efficient than it might otherwise be. So on the ground, we look at these management challenges. What are the impacts of some of these management challenges? System may be unable to issue bonds or obtain financing. They may be unable to keep up well with required sampling and understand really what's going on. And then it's just a problem of spreading cost. Things like engineering services, other outside services, water quality testing, even things like billing software, and then salaries and payroll. It takes about the same amount of time and effort to provide for an operator and billing effort for a community of 400 people versus one of, say, 1,000 people. But there's just far fewer people to spread that cost over. So small systems often struggle with the financing side of that as well. When we're looking at solving some of these management challenges, every system is very unique. And a good point to start is really try and take stock of the current position. Your system probably does quite a lot quite well, but there are most likely some areas where your system may be lacking. And then if you look 5, 10 years out in the future, where do you think you're going to fall short? When we look at management challenges, they're similar to some of those technical challenges in water supply systems. How do we try and solve those? We see partnerships growing, where, for example, a neighboring city becomes the people who issue bills and process payments for their neighboring community down the road. That is one way to solve some of those management challenges is to partner and or outsource. Outsource would more often than not entail bringing someone in to do some of the things you don't do very well. In the local area I am in, there's a lot of small wastewater systems have decided to outsource their camera and cleaning work, and that frees up their operators to do other stuff and frees the small communities from having to try and have operator knowledge and how to work a sewer vector truck and operate a camera system and somehow pay for that expensive equipment. The final thing is consolidation or merging. And this brings some economies of scale if that is able to be done. With that, I've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully there's some questions from today's presentation. With that, I'll turn it back over to Savannah and let her.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we did receive a question from an attendee, and they asked, in your opinion, is there a difference between the terms consolidation and regionalization? And if so, can you describe the difference?
Yeah, I don't have a dictionary in front of me, but consolidation, I would tend to think of being a situation where there's, say, 2 water suppliers, regulated water utilities at the state level, and their various boards of directors come together and they are then one organization. So basically there'd be one less utility in existence under a consolidation. Regionalization is more of, as I see and understand it, it's more of a situation where you might have neighboring communities have a single treatment plant. So there might be a treatment plant, and through various interconnections of pipe running several miles, one individual treatment plant may serve 4, 5, 10 different water utilities. In that situation, there's obvious, you have to set up a governance structure who owns that regional surface water supply plant. Your state probably has legal frameworks out there to allow for that. And then there's a lot of contractual relations as far as purchasing water, how much can any utility have, and there's a lot of details to be worked through. But fundamentally, if you regionalize, you're more likely than not going to have the same number of water utilities at the end as what you began with, where consolidation would actually reduce the total number of water utilities.
Thanks, Nick. So as of right now, that is all the questions that we've received. So for all the attendees still on the call, please feel free to submit your questions through the question or chat box, and I can get those right over to Nick. In the meantime, as we are wrapping up, I do have 2 more polling questions for you. And the first polling question is, if you are a small water system of 10,000 or fewer people served, are you interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance? If you are unsure about technical assistance or do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, please review the technical assistance form on our efcnetwork.org website. And you can also request technical assistance through our website. And getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And the last poll question I have is if you would like to subscribe to the Environmental Finance Center blog. Again, if you want to sign up for this blog but do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can sign up for the blog on our efcnetwork.org website. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, in the chat box, there is a survey link coming out to you. If you could just take a few minutes to let us know how you thought today's session went, that would be wonderful. We love to hear your comments. And again, so Nick's contact information is available on the screen. For any questions that are submitted after this point, we will be following up with you offline via email. I want to thank Nick for providing his expertise on the challenge-based webinar and thank all the attendees who joined us today. And to the attendee that just asked how long it takes for the PDFs before the PDFs are available, the slides and recording take about 2 weeks to process and post, and you'll receive a follow-up email indicating how to access those. Nick, I would like to throw it back to you for any additional closing comments.
Okay, no, I kind of threw a lot out at you, none of which was terribly in-depth. So like I said, feel free to reach out to me or somebody else in your EFC network who may be able to help you out. I deal with systems that are facing one or more of these challenges all the time, and recognize some of the difficulties of it. And we're here at the EFC network to try and help you work through some of them, and feel free to utilize our technical assistance, and we'd be glad to open communication with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick, and to all the attendees online. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.